Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Global Newsroom. Today, we're going to talk about social media and journalists. Let me share my screen with you and start a slideshow. So, we talked about social media and journalism in other classes, but today we're going to focus on how social media is being used to report on global news. Which social media platforms are you most likely to use, and which one of those do you use most often? What is the reason for that? So I just put on this slide a couple of social media platforms that are frequently used by journalists, and they include Facebook, TikTok. TikTok is becoming more and more popular than X or former Twitter. LinkedIn is a social media network, a social networking site, but it is also used to disseminate news and news stories. Instagram as well, and then I added Snapchat too. Now, what do you think is the most popular social media network worldwide? I looked at the most recent data by Statista website, and from what you can see here, the most popular social network worldwide is Facebook. So Facebook, as you can see on this graph, has as many as 3 billion users. So these numbers that you can see represent the most popular social networks worldwide as of October 2023, and it is ranked by number of monthly active users in millions. So the first one, as I said, is Facebook that has more than 3 billion users, and then it is followed by YouTube with 2.5 billion users, WhatsApp 2 billion users, Instagram as well 2 billion users, and then WeChat, that is a platform used in China predominantly. TikTok is right behind it. It is interesting when we look at all these social media, social networks worldwide. The Twitter is much lower on this graph. It is even lower than Snapchat, which was honestly a surprising information to me. But then this platform still is one of the most popular when it comes to journalism, because, and we'll actually go over Twitter later and see why is it that journalists out of all the platforms that are available to them decide to predominantly rely on Twitter for news exchange and distribution. Why is social media relevant in journalism? Social media is relevant both for journalism that we perform in the United States and global journalism. Social media platforms have changed the way journalists produce and deliver the news. I remember years ago when I was at this conference and we talked about how social media is important when we want to disseminate news. And I remember, and this was again years ago, we talked about the relevance of Twitter in reporting the news. And I remember that some representatives of news organizations mentioned how they would break a breaking news story on Twitter first and then post it on their news website with more information. So we want to use these platforms to kind of catch readers' attention and to let them know that if they are interested in this story, they can keep up with our website, they can keep up with our account on social media where we will post links to more detailed information. Social media have developed quickly because vast audiences wanted to get information quickly and information of all kinds. So not just about serious stories but also about personal stories, but they also wanted to learn what is happening internationally. And social media allow us to receive news that are related to diverse topics. Because of social media, because of social media, news consumers are now active participants in the news process. The recipients are news readers, for instance, or news or social media users. They can change the original message and then disseminate the news to a large audience. One of such examples would be, let's say, a news organization posts a story on Facebook, for example, and then you decide to repost that story and you add your own comment to the story. So basically, your opinion becomes the focus of the story, and then your friends on Facebook can read the entire story, but you kind of affected how they will perceive the story with your opinion on it. So this is how recipients change the original message with their opinions, with their comments. They can also add multimedia elements to other posts and so on. But social media allows them to do that. Now, I promise that one portion of the lecture is reserved for Twitter, because this is a very popular social media platform among journalists, but it is also popular for disseminating videos and photographs and information from all over the world by ordinary citizens or citizen journalists. So Twitter is actually now called X, and let's start referring to it as X instead of Twitter. X is a social media platform. It is the successor of Twitter. Twitter was a digital communication tool recognizable by a bluebird logo. So I couldn't help but add this old logo that Twitter was recognizable by. That logo doesn't exist anymore because the platform name has changed, as well as the logo. Twitter was established as a microblogging service in March 2006. I personally started using Twitter in 2009 as a journalist when I was editor-in-chief of a news website, and I started using this platform because it was just perfect for disseminating news quickly through it. And back then, we had to be really careful about selecting information that we're going to post on Twitter. One of the reasons for that was because Twitter allowed only short tweets of 140 characters. Now we have, if you're an account user who opted for subscription, you can create longer tweets. Who is the owner of Twitter? A billionaire, Elon Musk, acquired Twitter in 2022, and he decided to change its name to X. I'm still not sure why, because I think that Twitter was recognizable among its users, and many users are not happy with the change of the name, and many users still refer to it as Twitter. But as I said, I'm sure that new users will start recognizing this platform as X, and they will refer to it that way. One of the advantages of this platform is that it passes along pieces of information as a story develops. So it's perfect for news formats such as live blogs. And it is perfect for reporting on breaking news and rolling events in motion, because we can use this platform to add new information to it. So let's say if we're covering elections, we can use Twitter to keep updating our followers on election results. Everyone can create and share information instantly, everyone who is an X user. It also allows real-time delivery of information, but it's crucial in journalism. And another thing, tweeting a story ensures that it is being seen, discussed, corrected, and added to. Again, this is probably the most prominent platform that journalists use. But remember, there are other platforms that are actually, even though this one is popular for journalists, there are other platforms that you can use to reach a much wider audience with respect to news dissemination. So I believe that many journalists use Twitter not only to disseminate information, but because Twitter allows them to connect with people who live in certain areas from which they want to acquire some information, which is why they're on Twitter. And on Twitter, we can learn a lot about other users that we follow. We can also communicate with politicians, with prominent individuals who have accounts of this social media platform. Now, which social media do you think is the most popular in the US for obtaining news? So we talk a lot about X or X Twitter, but what do you think? Which social media is the most popular? Is it Twitter or is it TikTok? Is it Instagram? Is it Facebook? Or is it WhatsApp? What do you think? I'll tell you which one it is. It is Facebook. Even though I'm aware that younger generations prefer other social media platforms, especially Instagram and Twitter, remember that for a wider population, Facebook is still a go-to platform to connect with others, to communicate with their relatives, with their friends, but also to obtain news. Because don't look just at your generations, like your generation, like look at all other generations that have their accounts on Facebook. So they're not as likely to consume news on other platforms, especially elderly population. So this is why Facebook is still, even though if you don't use it, if you don't like to use it for your personal connections, if you prefer to use Instagram or if you prefer to use TikTok, just remember to disseminate news and to ensure that your story will be seen by a wide audience. This is a platform to go to. You should still disseminate news through other platforms, but remember, don't forget Facebook, even if you are not a big fan of this social media. Now, let's take a look at news consumption on social media. So I know that every semester when I ask students, where do you get your news? They would say through social media. So they basically see what what the people they follow are posting, or they follow certain news organizations and they would post a new story and then they would click on the link, go to their website, or just skim through that story on social media. So, but this is not the case with the entire country, even though this statistics that you see, it's still really impressive because basically people are split. There are 50% of people who would say that they never really consume news, get news from social media, but also 50% that do this often or sometimes. I think it is still impressive because for about 50% of the people, it is a completely normal routine to go and get their news through social media. And this has remained a trend, as you can see from 2020. And it's kind of, we have this steady, even though there, you see the percentage is, was 23 often, and then 19% in 2021, and then also 19 in 2023. It is still basically pretty, it's throughout the years, like if we look at these past 4 years, it's been pretty steady. So if we look at the statistics, we can definitely say that about 50% of people never or rarely consume news through social media. And then also about 50% of people do this sometimes or often in the United States. Now, why is social media so important? In the past, if professional journalists across the globe were not there to cover an important event, it was likely that it had not happened as far as the rest of the world was concerned. So if there is an accident, or if there is a big protest happening, if journalists are not there, how are we going to know that something like that happened in another country? But today, aside from journalists or official sources who can let us know about what is happening in other parts of the world, there's stories that come from a vast array of sources, and they are being spread by ordinary people. Some examples include, let's say, London bombing, terrorist attacks in London in 2007, when citizens reported on these terrorist attacks. They provided footages, they provided photographs, and they were sending these images to news outlets such as the BBC, and then the BBC reported that later to their audiences. Or there's so many videos and photographs produced during the Arab Spring or the civil war in Syria, which started in 2011. So for these events, we no longer rely only on mainstream media, but we can also obtain information from ordinary people. They help us learn more about the conflict, but there are also challenges when it comes to obtaining information from ordinary people. And that challenge is actually illustrated in this recent TikTok war. Actually, it is still ongoing, I would say, and it actually is related to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. It has brought social media in the spotlight, and please pay attention to this slide because I will have an exercise for you that you will need to complete before we meet in class. Popular platforms, especially TikTok, so not only Facebook and Twitter, but especially TikTok, have been used by ordinary people to report what was happening in Ukraine. The problem, however, is that aside from authentic images and authentic videos that we were able to see, there were deep fakes, propaganda, manipulated images, and fake accounts, and they have been used on social media in this war. Many fake accounts were created specifically on TikTok, and their aim was to spread disinformation and also to spread fake information. And for this reason, the war in Ukraine is called the first TikTok war. Now, what I want you to do, I prepared a reading for you aside from the textbook. So I prepared a reading for you. It's the article titled Ukraine Becomes the World's First TikTok War. It is posted in classes. So I want you to read this article and write a 300-word summary of it. What the article is about, what are its main points? What do you think about it? Like, how do you feel about the information presented in the article? So please just write a summary, explain it, provide your opinion, and then post it in classes. So under week 3. So what are other areas where we had a chance to see how social media was influential in delivering the news? So social media have been effective in overcoming official silence through the Middle East. There are countries where people cannot really oppose their governments. In the US, for example, we can, or other democratic countries, we can even communicate with our leaders directly, and we use social media to communicate with them. But now, even in countries that are non-democratic, such as Saudi Arabia, social media allow people to talk back to their rulers, probably not the extent that we can do in here. But remember, this has not happened before social media. So for many countries, social media have become a powerful tool to express their opinions and to talk to those who represent them. Facebook and WhatsApp are definitely the most popular social media in the Middle East region. Now, what are some issues regarding social media? First of all, internet consumers do not only have access to reliable information, to relevant information, but they also have access to rumors, fake news, unconfirmed information, and conspiracy theories. And we have seen this through the example of TikTok war in Ukraine. And we still see so many fake information coming from Ukraine. And how do we tell if that is true or not? How do you even identify that information? So let me give you a few tips, but even that might not be enough for you to see whether something is accurate or not. Inspect your sources. I know a lot of people, when they see an information or on TikTok, or when they see an information on Twitter, they automatically retweet it if it aligns with their attitudes. But what if that information is incorrect? So before you like something, before you retweet something, before you repost, just read that information. Does it contain bias? Is there's Approach it critically. Does it contain bias? How do you feel about what is being presented in that information? Who is the author of the information? Click on the link, go to about section on that website that posted that information originally, if the information comes from a website. Read about them. Inspect the headline. Is it too sensationalistic? Who is the author? Is there even an author listed? Are you familiar with this name? What kind of sources are they using? Is it an unconfirmed, is it an anonymous source? Or is that information unconfirmed? So if you have something important to tell, you won't be using anonymous sources unless we're talking about some very sensitive information, such as if you want to hide somebody's identity, we're talking about victims of sexual harassment and abuse, then in those cases, of course, you will anonymize those sources because you don't want to cause them any harm. But what I want to say is just be critical and also make sure that any information presented in that story is supported with arguments. If it is not, and if it's not supported with arguments from relevant sources, then there is something concerning about that story. So the problem with social media and rumors is that they can be disseminated as quickly as accurate stories. And of course, bad writing can spread all over the internet as well. Now, if we look at the internet and international news flow, we can see how more and more internet users are getting their news online and from media in distant places. And this is actually great news, because imagine 25 years ago, we would read the New York Times in New York and there were editions of it in Europe. But then now, an internet user from Belgium, India, Pakistan, South Africa, or Luxembourg, they can just read an online edition of the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Guardian, or the New York Times. So they can read all of it online. Journalists and journalism students could reach for information online instead of in libraries. So if you want to dig into system of another country and just explore their media system, you have so much information that is available to you online. So you don't need to go to a library and search for books. You can simply access this information online, and people can share ideas on a global level. So these are all the benefits of the internet and international news flow. I also wanted to reflect on one more group of people. So in this lecture, I talked a little bit about citizen journalism. What I have in mind when I talk about citizen journalism is, those people who report from remote areas, who report about events that other people maybe have not witnessed, but they were there when something happened, and then they decided to share that information further with the rest of the world. They use these tools that allow us to disseminate information to a wider population, and those tools include social media. So also, aside from journalists, so citizen journalists or bloggers, they publish information about events. Bloggers are not as popular as they were, I would say, 15 years ago. And one of the reasons for that is because people just started enjoying more using social media, and now they're to communicate with others. So it's faster, it's short information, you can engage automatically in discussions, but bloggers are still out there, and they supply us as well with information. So bloggers report news that the traditional media ignore and suppress. So they still have a relevant role because they might um, report on something. And this especially refers to bloggers in non-democratic countries. So they might report on something that their governments are hiding. They provide links to other bloggers with something to say, and today anyone can be a blogger and no one is in charge. What are some of the implications if we look at all these rapid changes in a global news environment? So what are some of the implications of rapid changes brought to us by the internet and social media? First of all, the cost of news will continue to drop. Online, the news is free, but then on the other hand, we can also see that prominent news organizations, such as the New York Times and the Washington Post, they created a strong model, and they are still an extremely relevant player on the market. I'm talking about the New York Times, but also Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. They're very relevant in the market, but they established a paywall and people subscribe to read their news because they perceive them as a relevant source. And then we have The Guardian, the British news media. They, for instance, do not have a paywall, but they have this very loyal readership, and they encourage readers to support their independent journalism through donation. And this model works well for The Guardian. What are some other implications of rapid changes? Rapid changes, sending and receiving information from anywhere in the world. So just imagine you can be today in Nigeria, talk to locals, and simply report using the internet, report your story from that country, or go to Belgium and attend a press conference by a European Union commissioner. And then you can report about that conference. You can report from that conference directly, or you can report live. So there's so many tools that we can use to disseminate information quickly. Also, one important thing is the two-way communication. With traditional media, we had a one-way communication. Basically, this is what journalists had to tell you about yesterday's events. You read that in today's newspapers, and that is it. You can react by, let's say, if they were discussing inflation, you could react by, thinking about how to budget, so to avoid these high prices, and that's your reaction to it. But with two-way communication, you can communicate with journalists and newsrooms directly. You can even communicate with politicians, with other prominent individuals directly. You do that in various ways. Some of them include responding to their posts on social media, or you can go to a news website and leave a comment on a news story. So this is the two-way communication I'm talking about. So it's not just a sender giving you some information that you absorb, but it's also in today's media environment, you're enabled to respond to that information, to tell them back how you feel about it, that information, or what your action will be, what your opinion is on that information. The number of sources is becoming unlimited. So you can find your interviewees through social media. I remember when I did a study about global journalism during the pandemic, and one of the ways for many journalists to communicate with sources was actually to look for sources through social media, connect with them, and talk to them then via Zoom, because they were unable to talk to them in person about certain events, like what is their COVID routine, how they go through it, if they had COVID, they talked about their experience with it, especially at the beginning when we didn't know much about the virus and so on. But I'm not talking only about sources as humans, but the number of sources is becoming limited, like the sources that we have online. Just imagine today how much data is available to us online, and that makes our job much easier because Years ago, we would need to go, let's say, if we're talking about a city government or and we need some information from them, like we would need to go there directly and search for information. But now a lot of it is available online and we can access it directly. So the number of sources is becoming unlimited, and this is very important to us as journalists. Personalized communication presents a challenge to authoritarian governments. So we mentioned how in the Middle East now people can respond to their leaders, and this is definitely becoming challenging to authoritarian governments. Why? Because they're not used to that. They're used to an ideal for any autocratic system is to simply deliver the information, and the information that they produce and deliver should not be questionable, should not be questioned. But now in a social media environment, they can be called on for what they're saying, so people can respond to them, people can question their information. And this is definitely one of the most relevant implication of rapid changes in today's news environment. So, looking into this lecture, what is it that we learned about social media and journalism? Social media are very important for journalists and citizens in terms of information dissemination, but remember, they're also important for information production, because there's a lot of relevant information that we can find on social media and that we can use in our story. Just be careful when you're using information from social media. Make sure to verify it, make sure to inspect it. If you want to use a photograph, you need to contact the person who posted a photograph directly and ask them if you're allowed to use it. Also, social media allows citizens to communicate with their representatives directly. As I mentioned, this was not the case in non-democratic system, especially not before we had the social media revolution. Also, we receive information from various sources and different parts of the world. But we need to keep in mind that there is a danger, and that danger lies in misinformation and fake news spread. So when we are looking for information on social media, we really need to be cautious about which information we want to use and include it in our story, especially in our story where we're reporting on an event that is happening internationally, but we are not there to witness it. And these are my references for today. I appreciate your time. If you have any questions, remember that you can always email me. This is my email address, or you can find me on X platform or former Twitter. Thank you very much. Have a good week, and please complete the exercise that is due before we meet. Bye.